Welcome to Planet, People, Mining, Voices at the Crossroads of Mining, Communities, and Sustainability. I'm your host, Allison Koppel. I have over 20 years in this space in 5 mining companies. I then found myself in transition when this podcast emerged through reconnecting with my incredible network, whose insights may be heard as one-off episodes on other platforms, while here they take center stage. If you're also a trailblazer with stories from the field, a mining colleague curious about what these people even do, if you're interested in this field of impactful, motivating work, or from another industry, join us as we celebrate their contributions, demystify their roles, and explore the community and sustainability issues they tackle. And for our Spanish-speaking audience, busca Planet People Mining en Español. Episode 6, Anthropologists in Mining, Cultivating Cultural Intelligence from Within, with Dr. Chris Anderson. Today I speak with Dr. Chris Anderson, an anthropologist and previously with Newmont, Rio Tinto, and Normandy Mining before founding his successful consulting firm, Yiri Global. Chris tells stories of spending 3 years immersed in an Aboriginal community in Australia, and we discuss the critical step of building internal capacity across the mine management on local culture, drawing on his experiences in Ghana, Turkey, and Australia, where he was also the drummer in a band. Chris shares about his innate ability to understand the rhythms of life and how it has been key to navigating complex social environments. Chris, it is so good to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you for agreeing to be a guest. Why don't you start off by introducing yourself beyond what I shared in the bio? What are a few life and work milestones?
Thanks for inviting me, Alison. It's a pleasure to be here, and I always enjoy talking with you. I'm a social anthropologist. Most people don't know what social anthropologists do, and they think we dig up bones and study rocks and things like this. But I learned how to figure out how groups of people, whether they're organizations or communities, how they tick, and go on from there. But yeah, oddly enough, grew up in the West Virginia coalfields because my dad was an engineer with U.S. Steel, and so that was a really, some would say bizarre, but I would say diverse and wonderful background for childhood. And then we moved to Australia when I was 17. I've had a really zigzag career. At one stage, I was an R&B drummer in a band and made quite a good living from it. And kind of at one point had to decide, do I continue my university studies or do I keep, singing soul music and playing the drums? But so, yeah, I trained as a psychologist originally and then switched to anthropology to do my PhD. And I lived for 3 years with tribal Aboriginal people, the Gugyalanji people in the far north of Australia. And that was also a real kind of a shock, I guess, because no one spoke English. There was no electricity. There was no running water or toilets or anything like that. And, I did the usual anthropological thing of living in with the community and slowly learning the language. So I think both the West Virginia and the Aboriginal experiences really kind of put me in the state of mind where for what I do in mining now, which is figure out how a given company or a project work and how they impact a community and how that community works, and then trying to work in that interspace between the two entities. I also have been the director of a large museum of natural history in Australia, which was another interesting experience, which taught me a lot about dealing with governments and fundraising and all of those sorts of things. But I did eventually join Normandy Mining as the first executive level position dealing with community issues. And on day 2, the chairman who I reported to sent me to Turkey. A key moment then was when Newmont bought us. And I was part of a small group of executives who were brought to Denver and have been here ever since. And then another big moment, going to West Africa. Once the board approved the Achim and Ahafo projects, I had always really enjoyed Ghana. That was a Normandy asset originally, so that came with the purchase, with the acquisition. It helped build a team that successfully built the project, and now and with social initiatives that have ensured that the mine has operated without major community unrest that led to a single day of loss of operation for more than 15 years. And I'm very proud of that. And I think I learned a lot there. So,
You've had such an amazing career even up to this point in the story. And there were a few pieces of what you just told. Of course, you and I have known each other for at least 10, maybe more years or so. And so got
mhm,
to know each other a little bit. But one, I did not know that you were in a band, but it sounds like even in that, you how attuned you are to I guess just rhythm and rhythm of people and rhythm of life is coherent for me there, and how this converges into the interface of communities and mind.
mhm. Well, just to your latter point, I kind of see no connection. People probably don't believe this, but no connection between my childhood in a mining area, mining town, and my dad being a mining engineer, and then me ending up in mining, 20 years later. I think I intended at one point to be a normal academic, and I'm still a recovering academic, I might say, in that I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland, and then also a research fellow at the Colorado School of Mines. And I do a lot of teaching, and I supervise graduate students and examine their theses and so on. But I don't know. It's fascinating to me when I think back to my childhood and how fast I was fascinated by everything going on around. My dad used to take me to the preparation plant that he was the supervisor of. But it really is weird that I ended up in mining.
It sounds like, and this is might be overstepping and a reach, but there must be a rebellious streak in you. The drummer. I'm not going to go into mining, but that at the end of the day, you realize that this is where somehow you feel at home, but in your own way and with your own experiences.
Yeah, that's true.
Interesting. So you got us into the story. You were in Newmont. You went to Ghana. Then what? What was after Ghana?
I then was just happened to be talking to an old friend of mine, Bruce Harvey, who at that time was the global head of communities and social performance for Rio Tinto. And he said, "Hey, how about you?" 'Cause I felt like I didn't want to go back to a corporate role. I really like the nitty gritty of a field role and so on. So he said, "Hey, what about you come and work for me?" So I ended up as a senior director for the Americas, so Canada, US, and Latin America for social performance for Rio Tinto. So yeah, and I enjoyed at that time. I really enjoyed Rio Tinto. I mean, we had a wonderful group of people on the social side worldwide, and I think we achieved a lot in writing guidance notes around things like free prior informed consent, gender issues, cultural heritage, and then an assessment process that helped the operations, live up to those standards and give them the tools they needed to, you know, work well with communities. So that was a good 4 years in my view.
Yeah, I mean, just that, and I don't know what your role was in these exercises, but when the key public Rio Tinto guidances came out, like why gender matters, why agreements
Mhm.
matter, there are such tools for the industry on what good guidance looks like, and such platforms that I used in my roles to
Yeah,
use with my team. So, um,
absolutely. Two other things during that era that I was involved in and I'm very proud of One is the Rio Tinto Stakeholder Engagement Academy.
I've heard of this. I mean, I heard of the Stakeholder Academy for years. I thought it was also such a model. It was something earlier in my career, starting with BHP. We collaborated with the University of Queensland and Oxford, Australia, to bring together training where we trained first the community teams, but
Mhm.
realized very quickly, similar to what you just shared, is you have to train the rest of the organization that there is certain skill
Absolutely.
for the community teams. Of course, their day to day is in and out of the community, but it's how do you create an organization that brings in the view of the of communities, the impact on them, the collaboration with them, how you build a real relationship based on trust, and what does that mean for decision making about projects or decision making just on day to day matters? How do you infuse
Right.
chip throughout the rest of the organization? And I always looked at the example of Rio Tinto's Stakeholder Academy. Is such an example of what was put out into practice. So what are you
Yeah.
doing? What are you doing now, Chris? What has been your role in the last few years?
Well, since 2015, I have run my own business, my own consulting business, Yeri Global, and there's a tail in that name that I'll come to in a minute. And I think hung my shingle out to try to, and it sounds kind of trite or hackneyed, to work with companies to make them better neighbors to communities. I need to say though that it's not just me. Sometimes a company will ask just me. So there's a mine in Idaho, a project in Idaho, and they have wanted a lot of training and help with the development of their. It's called it's an advisory council, but I guess in other places you call it a citizens advisory panel or committee, helping them build that and helping them develop agreements between the communities and the projects. So that's just me. Most other jobs where a team is required, I partner with Acorn International, a wonderful consulting firm that does both environmental and social work and risk management.
What are some stories that you can share, or if there's a conclusion or generalization about what might be misunderstood about your role? So I'm assuming whoever hired you understands what you're coming in to do and not do, but I'm also assuming that you have to engage with others in the company who may not fully understand
Sure.
or have misconceptions about what you are here, what challenge you are here to solve. Are there anything that is misunderstood about your role?
Well, I think it's really the function as well, the broader kind of domain of the social world. Miners uh, are want to put a big fence up around their sites, both a physical fence and a kind of psychological fence, and they want to control everything, understandably, because mining can be hazardous, but they want to control everything, and therefore they set this fence around, and that's their world. I remember a very senior vice president of a very large company about a mine in Peru said to me once, "Now listen, Chris, everything inside this fence is my responsibility, and whatever happens outside the fence, it's your job to fix it." And that's a misconception, I think, and it still goes on, that the social area is they're firefighters. Hey, listen, Allison, there's a riot at the gate. Now you and your people go out there and stop it. They're burning the buses and they're threatening people's safety. You go and fix it. So that's one misconception that we're firefighters. The other thing is that generally in mining, it was really that the main function of that thing, if it's anything, it's to hand out money. It's about sponsorships, donations. You figure out where we need to put some money so we can buy favor with our community. And I think that's a misconception too. There's an idea about the competence or otherwise of the social people. And in the early days, and even now to some extent, there just aren't enough social science trained professionals with experience, in some of the difficult situations that mining gets into. And but the idea was, hey, listen, we need a person to deal with the communities. Fred's a geologist, but he's a nice guy and everybody likes him. Let's make him the community relations manager. There's still a lot of that, but, and 20 years ago, there was even more. And the idea of an anthropologist, people said, hey, wait, you dig up rocks, don't you? Or what about human bones and things like that? They didn't understand the social and cultural aspect of anthropology that I was bringing to the roles and issues within mining. So I think that was another misunderstanding. And exposing senior managers, I mean, that's what we tried to do at the Rio Tinto Stakeholder Academy, exposing them to the business critical nature of getting this sort of thing right was so important. And I think it still is. And, you know, whenever I work with a sizable company, I advise the social teams, to do some internal training and awareness raising. Everybody from GM to VPs and so on. And it can be really eye opening for those people too to see. And I'm a big believer in involving them in what's going on in the community. So, for instance, in Ghana, if we had a big issue or we wanted to inform the community leaders, I would arrange for the vice president and the general managers to go and formally meet with the chiefs, where they had to have libation, and we had to talk through an interpreter called an Ochiami. You weren't allowed to directly talk to the chiefs. And building the Achim project in Ghana, we had to go through ceremonies to be able to use the sacred waters of the Praia River because we had to pump it 24 hours a day. And on Tuesday was the taboo day. And so theoretically, the chief said, well, listen, you can't pump the water on Tuesday. And we said, well, hey, the plant's got to operate on Tuesdays. So we had to perform a ceremony under their supervision and contribute things like goats and paint up our faces and so on. And, it was kind of fun seeing engineers and big shot managers and so on. We had to get up at 4 a.m. to do that. So it brings it home. I mean, if you ask those guys now, they would say, whoa, that it was really difficult and, we had to solve it. And we're glad we were involved as well. That sort of internal awareness raising of the business critical nature of that function is really important.
I want to focus a little bit more on this topic because I think the scene you just described is so key. I mean, I can't imagine the business conversation you would have had if you just went and said, "Nope, the plant's turned off on Tuesday." Period.
Yeah.
And with no understanding of why or the local community or what's important to them. Any other in this training kind of aha moments where you saw just someone who's not a social practitioner, their eyes open and you realized, yep, now they got it. They got it now. And then now this practice is going to be changed or their viewpoint is different.
I think when Newmont came there, one of the issues was we didn't really know as expats, and we had Australians, South Africans, Canadians, Americans. But one of the things we had to do was provide training for the expats about the basic niceties and protocols of Ghanaian interaction. So you cannot meet somebody in the morning without saying good morning. And yet we would have some of our expats just walk straight past Ghanaians in the office and not even look at them, much less greet them, and saying good evening at night, shaking hands, and especially in Ghana, you probably came across this too. Among men, mainly, there's a special handshake.
Oh,
Uh,
the hand snap. I could never do it.
yeah, yeah,
The snap.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I ended up with a Ghanaian colleague running a day-long workshop about Ghanaian culture and history and how you behave politely and diplomatically in Ghana. And the other flip side was we trained a lot of the senior Ghanaian managers in, especially those who'd never had it before, in kind of work culture and company culture. So we didn't want it to be just one sided. They were there were things that the Ghanaian managers had to know about expat culture and about the work culture of the company, as well as the managers coming in learning about the local culture and history.
It is so important what you are sharing about cultural training in a global company. When I've worked with different teams on doing something quite similar, actually, I was working with a team in Chile and Peru. And, some people not familiar with Latin America may say, well, both Spanish speaking, both next to each other must be very similar, highly different culture
Yeah,
and very
yeah.
rival cultures. There's a lot of different cultural nuances. One being exactly
Mhm.
what you said about saying hello to people. In general, Chileans will just say hello once in the morning, if that, and that's the end of that. Chileans from Santiago and a certain economic class. And in southern Peru, where we were working, very similar. You see someone, you make a point of saying hello politely to them. And so
Yeah.
that was part of my cultural training to this largely Chilean management team. And it was just kind of interesting. Right after that training, there was a gentleman, a local gentleman in Peru, and he was holding the door. He worked in the facility where we had the training. And every single Chilean manager walked out saying, and have a good day, and have a good day. And how are you, sir? And made a huge point. And this man was like, I've never seen so many Chilean managers in this town be so nice to me. He was so happy about it, and it really made
Yeah.
a difference. But those little nuances where you all of a sudden see culturally differences is so important to building that relationship.
One of the things, when I was sent by the chairman of Normandy Mining to Turkey, to the Ovacik mine, there are 3 communities that lived around the mine, and we had, I think, 778 permits that were all pulled by the government because of the community unhappiness. And everybody said, "Oh, it's the NGOs from Germany, and they're using cyanide as an excuse to scare people, and, it's sort of ideological. People it's the Australian company, so it's nationalism." When I went to the tea rooms and sat with the imams and drank tea, and this is what I discovered. Here were the problems. The contractors were getting drunk on the weekends and urinating in the town square. They were bringing prostitutes in from the capital city in company buses and putting them up in the man camps. And they were, out in Australian lingo, you'd say racing off the local girls. But the thing that really broke the camel's back was the dress and demeanor of the general manager of the project. He was a New Zealander, and he would turn up for a meeting in flip flops, stubby shorts, and t-shirts with opaque sunglasses and a baseball cap on. And the community leaders would come to the meetings in sports coats and ties. And they said, "Look at this little boy. He doesn't respect us. Look how he dresses." And it was this combination of all these behavioral things and the total, lack of a recognition that you're a guest in this place, and you're misbehaving, and you may not know it, but you're still misbehaving, and you're costing the company millions and millions of dollars. And so, it really brought home to me that the behavioral side of it is so important in building what you might call a social license to operate and maintaining it and nurturing it.
Chris, the scene you just described goes back to your earlier example of what's misunderstood about the the space in generals. That image you brought up of there's a protest at the door and they're burning something, they're super mad, you communities person go deal with that.
Mm.
And what you just described has nothing to do with the community's person, or very little. I don't know what they were doing in this party. But, it has everything to describe of the general manager's behavior, the example the general manager sets, the actual procedures for the contractors, how the contractor bidding took place and the expectations set during that bidding process of what would be accepted as part of the behavior of the people coming on site and into this work, what the hard limits are of the company, what the values are of the company. I mean, the situation you just described, unfortunately, I mean, I've seen pieces and entirety of what you just described in different examples in the mining industry. And then when
Sure.
I hear, people, oh, you go deal with this and give out soccer balls and money, and why would you be in this meeting? This is a critical meeting about contractors or how we're going to build
Yeah.
this site or whatnot. And
Yeah.
if they don't have, and back to our earlier point about just the cultural, I call it the chip. It's the cultural chip inside your head that you just see it. Because once you
Yeah.
actually do see it, I mean, I without knowing more of the situation that mine manager, general manager you just described from New Zealand, I'm sure he woke up every day thinking he was doing the best job possible. That he wants to do a good job. And most
Yeah.
people go to work wanting to do a good job, but they just don't see it. They weren't taught to
No.
see this aspect that what they are doing is not the best job. It is actually to the
Sure.
detriment of everyone's job. So I'm glad that you
Absolutely.
brought in that example. To me, that resonates very much.
Yeah. I've rarely met a problem at a mine or a project around the world that didn't involve contractors. And
I was just going to say, I always say contractors do what you tell them to do. That is the nature of being a contractor. So if the
sure, or you don't
company
pay them.
doesn't set out clearly from the first communication of what is expected at the site because they haven't yet done the work themselves of what is expected at the site. And then they get mad that the contractors are so called messing things up. I always go back, the bottleneck is usually two or three steps before of what is
Yeah.
the expectation we have set for ourselves transparently. Did we clearly communicate that just in contractors in the bidding process? Did we evaluate with clear criteria that evaluates according to this expectation? Then the
Mhm.
people you deal with in that bidding process usually are not the people showing up on the site. So, how are those people onboarded? How are they held to account, the ones who are actually on your site? So, it's a multi step process that I have seen over and over again, when there's a problem, at that point, it's like, "Oof, this Band-Aid is only gonna go so far."
I had a professor named John von Sturmer, and he really got me to look at social situations with a critical eye and to be very aware of what's going on and to question both in my own mind, but also people. And don't be afraid. Just two quick examples that he helped me understand. When I first went to Wujal, the community that I lived in with the Aboriginal people, I they treated me the name they called me meant baby. And the reason they called me that was that I didn't know what to do. I didn't know the proper way to talk. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know where to go, to avoid places where there are poisonous snakes. You get in the water and there's crocodiles there, breaking cultural mores. And he helped me understand that it's okay to be a baby in that setting. You should be, because otherwise you don't really learn what to do, the right way to do things. And the other one was an issue of dependence. He taught me, and I'll just give you the example. I would go out hunting and fishing with the young men, and we would be in a canoe, and we'd be out on the barrier reef, and they had outboard motors then, and the outboard motor would break down, and there'd be maybe four young men, Aboriginal men, sitting in the front of the boat, and they'd all turn and look to me because white fellas are supposed to know how to fix stuff like this. And I said, "Look, I'm sorry. I'm totally ignorant and I wouldn't be able to help you at all." And sure enough, after 5 minutes, somebody else in the boat came and fixed the motor in 10 minutes. And so John taught me, that there are real advantages in appearing to be the dunce of the group. You learn so much that way, and you don't create dependency where the uneven power relations usually between indigenous peoples and people from the West or whites is something. So he taught me that, and then Bruce Harvey, I mentioned him. Bruce was my boss in Rio Tinto. He was the global head of social performance. He also taught me an enormous amount, especially the time we spent at Foria Tinto in Mongolia, working with the herders and visiting people in their yurts and things. And Bruce brought me into, I mean, I can be kind of a sloppy person intellectually, and I'm a terrible project manager, but Bruce really brought an air of discipline in terms of, uh, the guidance books that we worked on, stakeholder engagement, and building new standards and policies around things. He brought that sort of systematic approach to me. But the last one and the most important one, and that's why I'm called Yeri Global. Old Man Yeri, it's Yirri. Old Man Yeri was my primary mentor in the Aboriginal community that I lived in for 3 years. I had my swag in his camp. He taught me everything. I mean, you could drop me into the Australian rainforest and I could live. I know all the foods, the fish, hunting wild pigs. Yeri told me all of that, and he's long dead. I mean, he died in the 80s, but his family gave me permission to use his name in the name of my company because much of what he taught me was about culture and about listening and being quiet when you're learning. And so I'm proud that I used his name in there. He's kind of my ultimate mentor.
Oh, I love that. And what you said first, though, about baby, and I often train, it's okay to, like you just said, be quiet. You don't have to just come up with a response.
Mm,
And
mm,
it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to not
yeah,
pretend that you have to know. You can be honest and transparent about that. And so that
yeah.
reflects there. I knew that the name Yuri had significance for you. I didn't know the full story. Just I always end my sessions in the same way, Chris. Just a couple more minutes. Any advice for people wanting to get into this field and work with mining companies and communities?
Sure. I often advise, and as I said, I advise graduate students, I supervise them, and they often ask me about this sort of thing. And these days, not everybody who's studying higher degrees wants to be an academic. And so I'm a big passionate believer in what used to be called applied anthropology. And I would say, listen, mining is an essential part of our lives in this world, and, we can use social science to make it better so that communities who are host communities don't suffer and end up worse off than they were. But you need the professional training. You need to get some early experience. And the other one I'd say is go and live in the bush. I mean, these days, kids graduate and they want a corner office, in a 40-story building and work at head office. Most mining companies won't hire people for head office who haven't had some years of experience in the field at site. But nobody wants to go and live you know, on the border of Arizona and Mexico or in rural Idaho or West Africa or Mongolia. You've got to get that site experience if you really want to learn things and if you want to advance in the industry. But it's hard. It's a real seller's market for well-trained social performance people, preferably with some degree of field experience. So I encourage people to study social science and get a master's at least, and then join up and even if it's a lowly position out in the bush, take it. Do it for 2 or 3 years and see things at first hand before you can move into the capital city. It's kind of a bugbear of mine, that last one.
I agree so wholeheartedly with that. I tell people, being lost in a country, in a situation you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, to me teaches you more about yourself and the world than I could ever teach you. And so there are
Absolutely.
experiences that you just need to have that you'll learn from, and then there are frameworks and tools and everything else I can teach you, but I
Yeah,
can't teach you that. So, oh, that is just wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, for
it's a
doing
pleasure.
this with me. Like, you've been one of my mentors over a number of years, thought partner, and just in this last, turn of my career as well. And just to share with our audience about your experience and your learning, we're all richer for it. So thank you very much, Chris.
No, thank you, Allison. I enjoyed talking to you, and they're very good questions too.
Thank you for joining us. If you like what you heard, please like, provide a 5-star review, and amplify.